He expected silence. But when Daniel Crane opened the door, he found a trembling woman wrapped in snow, with 7 children behind her, gazing at him as though he might be the last safe place on earth. He had never ordered a bride, and yet someone, somehow, had sent him a family. Before we dive into this true-to-the-heart story, if you believe in quiet miracles, the kind of love that heals, and the gentle power of second chances, so please subscribe first, because this one's for you. The old farmhouse crouched like a weary sentinel at the crest of a wind-scoured Montana hill. Its roof sagged beneath the weight of time and memory, wrapped in the hush of a snowfall that hadn't yet come, but whispered its promise through the cold. Daniel Crane stood alone in the kitchen, holding a chipped porcelain mug filled with bitter black coffee. He stared into it like a man searching for answers in a void, but held no answers. It never did. 3 winters had passed since the accident, and every morning since, Daniel performed the same quiet ritual. Shave, dress, make breakfast, set 2 plates on the table, then quietly remove one. The 4th chair always remained untouched. Small, blue-cushioned, and achingly silent. It had once belonged to Caleb, his 6-year-old son. The garage that had once been Daniel's sanctuary now stood sealed like a mausoleum. Dust-thick windows, yellowing tape. Inside, half-built robotic limbs lay frozen in time. Tools meant to help children like Caleb move again. To walk. To live fuller lives. But after the accident, Daniel had walked out of that garage mid-project and never returned. Never touched another tool. His world had collapsed into the confines of grief, and he had learned to keep things small, predictable, untouched by hope. That morning was no different. Quiet, numb, familiar, until the knock. 3 short raps. Then silence. Daniel frowned. No one ever knocked on that door. He hadn't had a visitor in months, maybe years. He placed the mug down, pulled on a flannel shirt, and opened the door. And the stillness shattered. A woman stood on the porch, snow clinging to her coat, like frost on bark. She was thin, nearly swallowed by her worn winter layers, damp hair curling at the edges from the wind. Her cheeks were red with cold, and she held a baby bound tight against her chest in a makeshift sling. Behind her stood 7 children in a staggered line, some barefoot, others wearing shoes 2 sizes too big. One boy gripped a cracked suitcase, its edges secured with duct tape. A girl, maybe 11, stood near the front, her large eyes steady, one arm protectively wrapped around a younger sibling. The woman's voice trembled slightly, though her eyes did not. "Are you Mr. Crane?" Daniel blinked. "I'm Daniel Crane." She hesitated, voice soft, accented. "I was told. Matthew Crane lived here." A twist, low in Daniel's stomach. "Matthew was my brother," he said. "He passed 3 months ago." The woman took a single step back, as though struck in the chest. Her eyes fell to the snow at her feet. "I see." Daniel looked past her to the children, tired, thin, yet impossibly composed. One sniffled. Another coughed. "What is this?" he asked, not unkindly, but with bewilderment. "Who are you?" "My name is Clara," she said quietly. "I came to marry him." It took Daniel a moment to grasp the words. "You're a mail-order bride?" She nodded. "We wrote letters. He paid the agency. He promised a new life. For all of us." Her hand swept behind her, a fragile gesture that tried to encompass the children. "They're mine. All adopted. Some from camps. Others from the orphan train. I couldn't leave them behind." Daniel's insides churned grief, confusion, a flare of anger that wasn't truly anger. It was sorrow. It was memory. "This can't be right," he said. Clara reached into her coat and retrieved a crumpled envelope. "His last letter," she said. "It has his handwriting." Daniel didn't take it. Couldn't. Her hands trembled as she added, "We have nowhere else to go. I didn't come to beg. I came because he said there would be a future here." Daniel looked out at the gray sky, the barn standing distant and empty in the snow, then back at the children. They didn't cry, didn't whine, as if life had taught them not to bother. A stronger man might have ushered them in. A kinder man would have done so without pause. Daniel wasn't sure he was either of those men anymore. I have a barn, he said at last. It's dry. There's hay. I'll bring you blankets. Clara bowed her head. Thank you. He turned, gathered quilts, and lit an old lantern. They followed him through the cold, footsteps soft against the frostbitten earth. That night, Daniel sat at his table with 2 plates. He stared at the 4th chair. He imagined Caleb, how he might have welcomed the newcomers, asked their names, offered his toys, shared the good cookies. Daniel's fork paused midair. He hadn't heard his son's voice in so long. Not like this. Not this clearly. From the barn, a baby's cry pierced the night. Then a woman's voice, humming a lullaby, a melody that needed no translation. It wasn't just Clara who had knocked that morning. It was life itself. And somehow he'd let it in. By dawn, silence hung heavy outside, but something had shifted within. Daniel stood at the window, coffee untouched in his hands. The morning light filtered through skeletal trees, brushing the frost in soft gold. But it wasn't the light that stirred him. It was a restlessness. He had barely slept. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw them. The woman with 2 steady eyes. The children, silent, bone-thin, and dignified in their stillness. The baby had cried only once, soothed by Clara's voice. Daniel had given them what he could, old quilts, a heater, cans of soup with a rusted opener, and above all distance. That part had come easily. It was only one night, he told himself. Yet something about them had burrowed in. He stepped outside into a curtain of gray. The wind sliced his skin. Snow flurries floated like whispers of something heavier to come. Montana never offered gentle warnings. At the barn, the scent of wood smoke mingled with cinnamon. Inside, Clara had built a cooking fire from a barrel and old bricks. The children had arranged their blankets in rows like tiny campers. One girl braided another's hair. The boy with the duct-taped suitcase swept straw into neat corners. Clara rose when she saw him. "Good morning," she said gently. Daniel nodded. "You found the propane?" "Yes. Thank you again. We'll leave as soon as the road's clear." He glanced toward the barn door. "They won't clear today." "I figured. I'll bring more food. Some firewood." As he turned to go, a small voice called after him, "Mister." Daniel looked back. A boy, no more than 6, stood holding a scrap of paper, a drawing scrawled in pencil on the back of a paper bag. It was Daniel's house. The porch. The 7 children. "Clara, you drew this." The boy nodded solemnly. "It's where we live now." Daniel's throat tightened. He gave a silent nod and turned before emotion gave him away. That afternoon, he brought an electric stove and flour. Clara made flatbread with powdered milk and canned peaches. The children ate quietly, but their eyes never left him. Watchful, waiting. By evening, the snowfall thickened. Heavy and relentless. The kind that stranded you for days. The roads would not open. The shelters were overbooked. Daniel cursed under his breath. He stared at the living room like it was a betrayal. It had stayed untouched for too long, but now it had to be opened. He hauled out mattresses, cleared the guest room, opened the linen closet that had remained shut since Caleb died. It still smelled of lavender. That night, Clara and the children moved inside. The baby slept in a laundry basket lined with towels. The children brushed their teeth with borrowed supplies. Clara moved through the house like a whisper, grateful, but always preparing to leave. Around midnight, Daniel found himself at the doorway to the living room. Clara sat curled on the couch, a sweater wrapped around her shoulders. The fireplace glowed gently. The house was still. "I came to check the heat," he muttered. "It's working," she said, smiling faintly. Silence lingered, not cold, just unfamiliar. "I'm sorry," Clara said suddenly, "for showing up like this, for turning your life upside down." "You didn't," Daniel said. "It was already upside down." She studied his face. "You don't talk about him, your brother." "There's not much to say." "There must have been good in him," she replied, "to try something like this, to invite strangers into his life." Daniel didn't respond. Claire leaned forward. "He wrote about you. He said you were someone who used to fix things, not just machines, but people." Children. Daniel looked into the fire. I used to build limbs, he said. Devices. For kids who couldn't walk or feed themselves. His voice dropped. Then one day, I couldn't help my own son cross the street. Clara said nothing. She didn't need to. I shut everything down, he said. The garage. My work. My purpose. And yet, she said softly, here we are. Warm. Safe. Alive. Daniel gave a hollow laugh. One night, he said. Is that still true? She asked. He didn't answer, because he wasn't sure anymore. By morning, the world outside had vanished beneath a blanket of snow. The barn was buried, the roads erased, but within the house, something had begun to stir. Not noise, movement, life. Daniel stood in the hallway, coffee in hand, watching as Clara gently tied the baby to her chest using a bed sheet. And for the first time in years, the quiet wasn't hollow. It was full, and it was changing everything. By noon, the laundry lay folded in crisp piles, the wood neatly restocked beside the back door, and the children, full of giddy invention, were gathered in the living room, playing some improvised game involving plastic measuring cups and a box of dried beans. Daniel stood there in the stillness of his own house, like a stranger dropped into someone else's dream. The warmth, the soft chaos, the laughter that bounced gently off the walls, it all felt unfamiliar, like a song half-remembered from a lifetime ago. He cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly. You don't have to do all that. Clara turned from the sink, drying her hands on a dish towel, her face calm, but unreadable. I know. Then why? He asked, not unkindly. She offered a small, knowing smile. Because it's what a house needs. He blinked, startled by the simplicity of her answer. A house. Her smile deepened, tender and patient. Yes, she said, if you wanted to stay at home. Later that day, Daniel opened the garage door. The cold slapped him with memory, biting and indifferent. Dust hung in sunbeams like weightless ghosts, drifting in the breathless air. Cobwebs laced the shelves that once held tools and dreams, tools sharp and precise enough to rebuild a future. If only he'd had the courage to touch them. He hadn't stepped inside this place in nearly 3 years. He wandered, silent, past the old workbench, past the half-assembled stabilizer frame, still etched with his son's height in Sharpie. Caleb, age 6, the crooked line like a fragile testimony. His fingertips grazed the wood, and suddenly, Caleb's voice burst in his mind like a flare in the dark. I'm doing it, Daddy. That breathless, stumbling joy as he tottered forward in the prototype. The memory hit Daniel in the chest like a hammer. He turned quickly. He wasn't here for the past. He came looking for the space heater. Something practical. Something unbreakable. But as he reached for it, his eyes caught the edge of a stack of old sketchbooks. High on a dusty shelf, Caleb's sketchbooks. He pulled one down. Pages fluttered like fragile leaves, revealing stick figures with robotic arms, kids with jetpacks and pancake-making machines, all grinning with crooked, hopeful smiles and misspelled captions that felt like prayers in crayon. Daniel hesitated, then tucked the sketchbook under his arm and carried it back inside. That night, while the wind howled against the windows and Clara cradled the baby in her arms, something shifted. Daniel surprised them all by sitting, really sitting, at the table, not hovering on the edge, not ready to flee, but sitting fully, chair pulled close, hands folded like someone who intended to stay. The children watched him with wide, reverent eyes, whispering behind cupped hands like they'd witnessed a miracle. Clara ladled soup into mismatched bowls. It's just lentils, she offered softly. Daniel took a bite. It was, somehow, the best thing he'd tasted in years. Afterward, the youngest girl, no more than 5, her curls as wild and soft as dandelion fluff, approached him with cautious bravery. Sir, she whispered, are you a cowboy? Daniel blinked. A cowboy. You live on a hill, she said with deep conviction. And you wear boots. Cowboys live on hills. He almost laughed. I suppose that makes me something like a cowboy. She nodded solemnly. You should get a hat. From the sink, Clara chuckled softly. Over the next 2 days, The house transformed in quiet, almost sacred ways. Daniel noticed first when the hallway no longer echoed. The silence was broken now by soft voices, toddler giggles, a baby's wail, the low hum of life re-inhabiting space. Clara had pinned drawings to the pantry door, 7 crayon masterpieces, stick figures holding hands. One clearly meant to be him, complete with a bushy brown mustache he didn't actually have. Then came the scents, yeast and wood smoke, peppermint soap, the scent of living, the scent of a house remembering how to be a home. Daniel wasn't ready for all of it, but he didn't try to stop it either. On the 3rd day, he noticed a slow drip beneath the bathroom sink. Clara had already placed a bowl beneath it. "You should have told me," he said, pulling open the drawer for a wrench. "I figured you'd come around eventually," she teased, her voice light. He knelt under the cabinet and began to work. She crouched beside him, flashlight in hand. "You know what you're doing?" she asked gently. "I used to," he murmured. When he stood up, victorious over the leak, Clara handed him a towel, grinning. Still some magic in the cowboy. Daniel looked at her then, really looked. Not just her smile, but the weariness behind it. The kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. The kind of strength forged by survival. "Clara," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "where did you find strength to take in all 7? Her smile dimmed, but didn't disappear. "Some people collect stamps," she said. "I collect souls no one else wants." Daniel didn't know what to say, so he nodded. That evening, he stood at the window, a mug of tea in hand. Clara had insisted he try it. Snow had begun to recede at the driveway's edge, revealing patches of gravel like the skin of a world thawing out. Clara joined him, gently rocking the baby. "I'll understand if you want us gone, once the road clears," she said. He didn't answer at first, just looked at her, then realized something startling. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't afraid of his own house. Not the garage, not the hallway, not even the 4th chair at the dinner table. Because somehow, without asking for permission, she had started to mend more than pipes. She was mending him, and that terrified him, because letting people in meant you could lose them. But maybe they'd stay. The 4th door at the end of the hallway had stayed closed for years. Caleb's room, yellow walls, spaceship curtains, dinosaurs on the shelves, tiny sneakers still sitting where he'd left them. Daniel never touched it. Not once. Until that afternoon. He hadn't meant to leave it unlocked. Just went to get an extra blanket. Left the key on the table. And one of the kids, he wasn't sure which, must have wandered in. When he saw the door ajar, soft golden light spilling into the hallway like the echo of laughter, he froze. A wave of dread hollowed him out. Then Clara appeared beside him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't realize which one went in." Daniel nodded tightly. "The little one. The one who thinks I'm a cowboy. She didn't break anything." "I wouldn't care if she had," he said, surprised by his own truth. Clara looked at him, reading something he didn't know was on his face. "You can go in, you know," she said gently. "I don't know if I can." She nodded. "Then let me." He stepped aside. From the hallway, he listened to the soft sounds within, drawers opening, cloth being folded, paper gently rustling. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. When Clara returned, her eyes were glassy. In her arms were a sketchbook and a plastic lunchbox with fading superhero stickers. "He was bright," she said quietly. "I can feel it in the room." Daniel took the lunchbox, hands trembling, one sticker red, to the rescue. "Thank you," he whispered, voice thick. "For what?" "For going in when I couldn't." That night, the snow fell again, thin, almost reluctant. Daniel sat at the table, sketchbook open, page after page of dreams. Kids flying on jetpacks, robots making pancakes, machines healing broken bones. Caleb's world so full of hope. The last page was unfinished. A garage filled with children laughing. At the bottom, in blocky handwriting, "My dad fixes everything." Daniel closed his eyes. He had shut the garage door because he couldn't fix what mattered most. But Caleb had believed in him anyway. Outside, one of Clara's boys carefully placed 2 boots, side by side on the porch. like an offering. Daniel stood, walked to the garage. The air hit him, sawdust, oil memory. He flipped the light. Nothing. So he went back inside, found the old toolbox behind the furnace, fixed the wiring himself. The lights came on. Time blinked awake. Blueprints, tools, unfinished dreams. A 3D printed limb. A labeled bin, microchips, Caleb's idea. Daniel stood there, then picked up a screwdriver. His hands remembered more than his heart did. The next morning, Clara found him at the workbench. Grease smudged across his cheek, eyes alight. She handed him coffee. "I had this idea once," he said. "A leg brace that grows with a kid, like adjustable shoes. I never finished it." "You are now," she replied. "Because of Caleb?" He paused. "No," he said softly. "Because of them." Later, Clara found the children cutting paper snowflakes. The youngest had taped one to the window, right next to Daniel's coat. "Is this our forever house?" she asked. Clara knelt. "Why do you ask?" "Because the walls feel like they're learning how to laugh again." Clara kissed her forehead. "Maybe it is. Maybe it's laughing already." That evening, Daniel brought a box down from the attic. Inside were Christmas lights, old photographs, and Caleb's favorite toy, a plush dinosaur that roared when you pressed its foot. He held it for a long time, then handed it to the boy with the taped suitcase. "It belonged to my son," he said. "I think he'd want you to have it." The boy didn't speak, just held it to his chest like something sacred. That night, when the baby cried, Daniel rose before Clara could and cradled the child gently to his shoulder. For the first time in 3 years, his arms didn't feel empty. And in a quiet moment, when Clara searched for pajamas and opened the wrong drawer, or maybe the right one, she found a manila envelope tucked beneath old linens. 3 words written in fading blue ink. For Daniel M. Her heart stopped. She knew that handwriting. She sat on the edge of the bed, envelope trembling in her hands. Matthew. She didn't open it right away. The dead rarely speak. And when they do, they don't whisper what you expect. But finally, with a breath and a prayer, she slid the letter free. It was short, raw, the kind of letter only written when a man knows time is running out. And it began something Daniel never imagined. The final, quiet chapter that might just lead to a brand new beginning. "If you're reading this, Daniel, it means I didn't make it to meet her." The letter was short, but its weight was immense. More than ink on paper. More than a final confession. It was a lifeline cast across a chasm of silence and regret, from one brother to another. The words were careful, tender, and threaded with the kind of hope born only at the edge of loss. "Her name is Clara," it said, "and she's not like anyone I've ever known. She's strong in ways that don't scream, and soft in ways I never earned. She's traveling with children, none of them hers, but you wouldn't know it to look at them. I've made more mistakes than I can count, Danny. But this was my last attempt to do something right. If she makes it to Montana, and I'm not there anymore, please, don't turn her away. Let her stay. Let her be part of something. And maybe, if your heart's ready, let yourself be part of it too. She doesn't need saving, but maybe you do. Signed simply, Matt." Clara's fingers trembled as she folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope, her breath catching as if the message had physically wound itself around her lungs. The paper was heavier now, no longer just parchment but a relic of grief, love, and unfinished redemption. 2 brothers, one buried beneath the weight of his final act, the other, perhaps still capable of building something from the wreckage. She found Daniel out in the garage, his sleeves rolled high, arms immersed in a snarl of wiring and mechanical parts. He was so focused he seemed to have forgotten everything. The time, the weather, maybe even himself. When he finally noticed her, he looked up, a question in his eyes. Clara stepped forward and pressed the envelope into his hand. He stared at it, unreadable. "Where did you?" "Guest room drawer," she said quietly. "I wasn't snooping. It found me." He nodded stiffly and opened it. His hands, usually so steady with machinery, shook slightly as he unfolded the page. His shoulders tensed, then slowly began to slacken. His face remained mostly unchanged, but something behind his eyes fractured. A small crack. A window, maybe. When he finally spoke, his voice was hushed. He always said too much or nothing at all. I guess this was his in-between. Clara said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only language worth speaking. Daniel folded the letter with slow reverence and slid it back into its envelope. He believed in people, he murmured. Sometimes too quickly, but maybe he saw something I didn't. Clara tilted her head, gentle curiosity softening her voice. And what was that? Daniel met her gaze. That it's not too late to start over. In the days that followed, the snow began to retreat under the sun's persistent coaxing. Gravel peeked through the driveway again. Green tips of stubborn grass pushed their way up near the porch. The children rushed out into the open air like birds freed from a cage, laughing, spinning, chasing their shadows and each other. Daniel, who had always worked with machines and not laughter, found himself building a tire swing, tying it to the old oak tree in the yard. The sounds that followed, the peals of unrestrained joy, filled the quiet property like music remembered from a forgotten tune. Inside the house, things shifted. Not just in furniture or noise, but in feeling. Life returned. Clara set up an art station in the living room. Paper, crayons, glue sticks. Each night, the walls filled with new drawings. One featured a cowboy cradling a baby dinosaur. Another showed a robot dog leaping under stars. And then there was the one Daniel pretended not to notice. A tall man fixing a machine, while 7 small stick figures clapped behind him. That evening, Clara found Daniel sitting on the back porch, the letter from Matthew worn thin in his hands. "Did I ever tell you how I met your brother?" she asked, sitting beside him. He shook his head. He answered a newspaper ad. A friend of mine had placed it. I was too proud. We wrote letters back and forth for months. He didn't promise much, but he wrote like a man who still believed in beginnings. Daniel offered a faint, almost wistful smile. "That sounds like him." "He was kind," Clara said. "Lonely, but not broken. I think he wanted to give me a home. Not because I needed one, but because he did." Daniel turned the letter over in his hands. And did he? Clara looked toward the horizon. Not in the way he imagined, but maybe in a way that still matters. Silence settled between them, quiet and reverent. "I'm not him," Daniel said after a long pause. "I know," she replied gently. "I don't know how to be what he hoped I'd be." "I never asked you to be anything," she said, her voice steady. "Only to stay open long enough to become who you want to be." He nodded slowly. "I think I'm trying." That night, when the fire had burned low and the house had quieted, Daniel placed Matthew's letter in a frame and set it gently on the mantel. Not hidden, not buried, but visible, honest and unfinished. A reminder that some endings were really beginnings in disguise. The phone call came just after breakfast. Daniel had been rinsing the dishes, the smell of oatmeal still lingering in the air. The old rotary phone rang sharply, a sound so rare it felt surreal. Clara looked up, her hands busy feeding the baby, while Daniel wiped his hands and answered. "Crane residence." "Mr. Daniel Crane?" a woman asked, her tone clipped and formal. "Yes. This is Cynthia Brooks from the Montana Department of Family Services. We've received an anonymous report regarding children residing at your property under the care of an undocumented individual. I'd like to schedule a home visit for tomorrow morning." Daniel's heart clenched. "I see. I only need to verify the children's safety and living conditions, but I will need to see legal guardianship documentation. Do you have that?" He hesitated. "No, not yet." "Then I'll see you at 10 a.m. Please have all children and the caregiver present. Thank you." Click. Daniel remained motionless, the dial tone buzzing like an alarm from a life he thought he'd left behind. That night, after the children were tucked away and the fire whispered softly in the hearth, Daniel told Clara. "They're coming," he said quietly. "At 10. Clara didn't move. "For what?" "To see if you're fit, if the kids are safe, if you're legal." She nodded. "And if they decide I'm not, they'll separate the children, put them in foster care, and deport you." Clara's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. I knew this would come. I didn't, Daniel said, almost ashamed. You chose to believe in now. I've lived too long in what-ifs. There has to be something I can do, he said, desperate. No time for paperwork. No, she cut in gently, but he stood up suddenly, restless. Maybe there's still time for something else. Something that proves this us is real. What are you thinking? Daniel looked at her with unflinching resolve. I'm thinking it's time I stop pretending this is temporary. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat at the dining table, filling out legal forms in flickering lamplight, guardianship affidavits, sponsorship declarations, documents that required not just ink, but belief. By 9:45 the next morning, the house gleamed. The children wore their best clothes. Clara had ironed a clean shirt for Daniel. It didn't hide the grease under his nails, but it was something. At 10 o'clock sharp, a white SUV pulled into the drive. Cynthia Brooks stepped out, tall, stern, clipboard in hand. She knocked once. Mr. Crane? Yes, ma'am. Please come in. She entered, cool eyes sweeping over the living room. You understand the nature of this visit? I do. Good. I need to see the children and Miss Clara. Clara appeared, the baby on her hip, the children lined up behind her like a makeshift choir, solemn, brave. How long have they been with you? 18 days, Daniel answered. Any legal status for Miss Clara? Not yet, but I've filed preliminary guardianship for the children, working on sponsorship for Clara. You're aware this is highly irregular. I'm aware it's not perfect, but they're safe, they're loved, and this home is the first steady ground they've known. Cynthia flipped a page. Any verification of Miss Clara's identity? Clara stepped forward. I have UN refugee documents, a letter of reference from a Pennsylvania pastor, files on each child, who they were, where I found them. Cynthia paused. And who are they now? Clara smiled. My children. Another long silence. Then finally Cynthia said, What you've done skirts the edge of legality, but I've seen chaos. This is a home. After Cynthia left, Clara stood on the porch, arms folded. She didn't say yes, Clara murmured. No, Daniel said, but she didn't say no. She turned to him. Why are you doing this? He looked at her, voice low. Because every time you look at me like this is still temporary. I want to prove you wrong. You barely know me. I know who I was before you came, and who I am when you're here. That's enough for me. She studied him, then kissed his cheek, soft, fleeting, but real. And somewhere inside the house, a child started to laugh. The sound rolled down the hallway and into Daniel's chest. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't brace for the sound. He smiled, because maybe, just maybe, the house had started laughing too. I don't care who wrote those papers, Clara whispered, her voice shaking with unspent emotion. I care who stands in front of me every day. And what I see, what I know, is someone who's given more than most would dare. Her eyes, defiant yet glassy with tears, searched Daniel's face. I should leave, she said, almost inaudibly, before they force it, before it hurts them. But Daniel, who had known what it was like to live half a life, spoke with a quiet certainty that had grown roots in pain and perseverance. No, he said, voice unwavering. You belong here, and if anyone says otherwise, they'll have to come through me. Clara stared at him, as though trying to find a seam, a crack, a hesitation. There was none. His resolve was iron-wrapped in tenderness. That night, something inside Daniel shifted. It was as if the silence that had hung over him since the accident finally lifted. He reached for pen and paper. Not an email, not a form, but ink pressed to page with his calloused hand, his script uneven and etched deep into the fiber, like scars that told the truth. He wrote a letter to an old friend in Boise, a man who now worked with a nonprofit helping undocumented families. He didn't mask the truth. He didn't filter the pain or round off the edges. He wrote everything, honest, bare, and raw. Then, folding it like a prayer, he set it on the windowsill where moonlight found it. turning it silver. The next morning, Daniel returned to the garage. It had become more than a workshop. It was a cathedral of redemption. He hadn't touched the leg brace in weeks, not since the visit from the state that made everything feel fragile. But now he finished it. Adjustments, calibrations, quiet breaths. And when it was done, it felt right, balanced, whole. "Jacob," he called gently. The boy emerged, suitcase still bound with tape, limping softly on his left leg. "For me?" Jacob asked, eyes wide. Daniel nodded. "Try it." Clara hovered nearby, her presence like a guardian angel too tired to fly, but too stubborn to fall. Together, they helped Jacob into the brace, fastening straps, testing the knee flexion. "Walk to the door," Daniel said. Jacob took one step, then another, each movement steadier, more certain. By the time he reached the door, his back had straightened like the beginning of a new story. "I didn't fall," he whispered, astonished. Daniel smiled. "No, you didn't." That evening, Clara found the letter on the windowsill. Her hands trembled as she read the name on the envelope. "You're trying to make us legal?" she asked, voice cracking. Daniel shrugged, like it was no grand gesture. Seemed like the least I could do. She stepped close, lay her hand over his heart, his real heart, the bruised one that still beat behind old regrets. "You're not who you were," she whispered. He looked into her eyes. "Neither are you." And then she kissed him, not like a question, but like an answer she'd finally allowed herself to believe in. The first time Daniel took the children into town, it felt like flinging open a door that had long since rusted shut. The spring fair was in full bloom, kettle corn floating on the breeze, the air thick with laughter and the scent of possibility. Daniel hadn't been to a town event since before the crash, back when people knew him by name, not by the silence he wore like armor. But Clara had spotted the fair flyer outside the feed store and pinned it on the fridge with a dinosaur magnet, and the children had buzzed like bees in a dream. And so they went. Daniel borrowed the old church van, securing car seats with the care of surgeon. Clara packed sandwiches, juice boxes, and spare socks in case of mud or mystery. When they arrived, the world was in color again, bunting stretched across booths, pies under mesh lids, bean bags flying, and guitars humming under the old oak tree. At first, people looked. 7 children, 1 unfamiliar woman, and Daniel, the man who hadn't been seen since the night the world cracked open. But then the ripple. Pastor Eugene was the first to wave. "Good to see you, Dan." Then Mrs. Kravitz, who handed Clara an apple tart like a silent blessing. By the time they reached the arts tent, the whispers had softened into smiles. The children scattered like sunbeams. Jacob entered the poster contest with a drawing of a flying garage. The youngest girl colored Daniel's face purple and crowned him with crayons. Clara's lavender scones sold out before the hour turned. Daniel, he fixed a lemonade tap, realigned a dunk tank, and said thank you, more times in one day than in 3 long years. But it was the talent tent that shifted the ground beneath their feet. At 3 p.m., Clara signed the children up as the final act. Unbeknownst to Daniel, they'd been practicing in secret for weeks. They called themselves the Patchwork Choir. The stage was barely bigger than a truck bed, but when those 7 children stepped onto it barefoot, awkward, radiant, every adult leaned forward, as though sensing a miracle in the making. Jacob opened shyly. "Hi, we're new here." Nervous laughter. Then they sang. A patchwork of lullabies, folk tunes, and one Ukrainian verse Clara had taught them. Their voices were not perfect, but they were true. Halfway through, the baby in Clara's arms let out a loud, joyful gurgle. The audience laughed, not mockingly, but like the first warmth after a bitter winter. A laughter that said, "We see you. We're ready to know you." Daniel stood at the back, arms folded, fighting tears. He failed, because something inside him came undone, not shattered but released. His grief didn't disappear, but it no longer ruled him. It softened, breathed, became something he could carry. They belonged. After the applause faded, the mayor came forward. "I've lived here 40 years, she said, "and I don't cry at these things anymore." She shook Daniel's hand, then Clara's. "If you ever need support documents, housing, school, I've got your back." That night, fireflies blinked through twilight as the children ran barefoot through the grass. Clara sat with her tea on the porch. Daniel joined her, dust still on his boots. "They were brave today," he said. "So were you." He looked at her. "Do you ever wonder if this is too much? If it won't last?" She didn't answer right away. "I've learned not to ask if joy is permanent," she murmured. "I just ask if it's real. And right now it is." They sat in the hush of that truth. Then Daniel disappeared inside and returned with a frame. The drawing Jacob had entered, now laminated and mounted. "Let's hang this above the mantel," he said. "Why?" "Because that's what we've built." She looked at the garage rocket hybrid, then at him. "A garage that flies." He smiled. "Or a family that does." The garage had never looked so alive. Tools hung in labeled rows. The floor had been swept, repainted in a shade of soft blue-gray. On the back wall, a wooden shelf now held child-sized orthotic prototypes, each tagged with a name: Jacob, Mila, Jonah, Sasha. Daniel had transformed the space that once held only sorrow. A space heater in the corner, a Bluetooth speaker whispering bluegrass, but most of all laughter. Light footsteps, questions, wonder. Children came in and out now, tinkering with wires and glue, dreaming up wild inventions, and Daniel welcomed it all. On a quiet Tuesday, Jacob sat on a stool, wearing the final version of the brace, version 3.5. Sleek, quiet, adorned with dinosaur stickers. "You think it'll make me fast?" Jacob asked. "You planning to race someone?" Daniel teased. "Mila, but she cheats." Daniel laughed. "Then we better test it." Outside, Jacob sprinted across the yard, a blur of motion and giggles, the brace moving like an extension of him. Clara watched from the porch, tears caught in sunlight. Daniel joined her, quiet. "Don't tell him," he said. "But that brace was designed for Caleb." "Would he mind?" she asked softly. Daniel shook his head. "No. He'd be proud. It found the right legs." Word spread. A therapist who'd seen Daniel's fair booth sent a boy. Then a girl with cerebral palsy. A 5-year-old who lost a hand. Twins with brittle bones. Daniel never charged. "Still testing," he said. But what he gave was more than devices. He gave dignity. The garage became more than a sanctuary. It became a beacon. One day, Clara placed a folded paper on his workbench. It was official. Her name, the town seal, provisional legal status, guardian. "You did it," Daniel said, breathless. "No," she replied. "You did. Your letter, your stubbornness, your heart." She reached for his hand. Daniel were staying. And he finally fully exhaled. "Good," he said, "because this house finally fits again." They hosted an open garage day, Jonah's idea. Clara made brownies. Daniel set up demos. Neighbors arrived, laughing, curious, giving gifts, offering tools, and even a 3D scanner. But the moment that stole breath was when old Mrs. Lindell pointed at the shelf of braces and whispered, this place has heart." And she was right, because what they'd built wasn't just a garage. It was a sanctuary, a second chance, a family that could fly. After the last of the guests had gone and the echoes of laughter had faded into memory, the children lay sprawled in sleep, their dreams tangled in sugar and joy. Daniel stood alone in the garage, surrounded by the soft hum of stillness and the echoes of what the space had become. It wasn't a garage anymore, not really. It had grown into something living, breathing. Clara appeared quietly behind him, barefoot, the hem of her sweater brushing her knees, holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She offered him one with a gentle smile. "This," she murmured, her voice barely more than a breath, "this is what you were always meant to build." Daniel turned to her, something tender stirring in his chest. "It's not just me." "No," Clara agreed softly. "But it started with you saying yes, even when it was hard." He nodded slowly, and for a long moment, looked at her, really looked, saw the person who had walked into his silence and refused to leave. You changed everything, he said, voice low. Clara tilted her head with a quiet smile. You changed first. A stillness held the space between them, rich with unspoken things. Then Daniel stepped closer, his fingers brushing the curve of her waist. It was a touch both hesitant and steady, the touch of someone returning from exile. I never thought I'd feel this way again, he confessed. Like what? Like my life could start from the middle. She smiled then, eyes glowing. That's where all the best stories begin. Later that night, as they turned off the lights and left the garage behind, Daniel paused in the doorway one last time. The last filament bulb flickered overhead, casting a warm, golden hue. The room didn't just glow, it felt alive. After years of shadows, it finally had a pulse. A particular chair had waited there for 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. Every morning, Daniel had passed it by, his gaze brushing across it, but never landing long. It was smaller than the others, painted a pale blue, chipped at the legs. It had belonged to Caleb. After the accident, no one had touched it, not to sit, not even to dust. Claire had asked about it once, early on. He hadn't answered, just shaken his head. But that morning, sunlight pouring in through the kitchen windows, the scent of cinnamon rolls heavy in the air. The chair was no longer a relic. It was simply in use. Chaos reigned in the kitchen. 7 children raced about, sticky-fingered and loud, bumping into each other, arguing over who got the corner slice. The baby giggled in his high chair, cheeks full of toast. Daniel, spatula in hand, stood amid it all, bemused, overwhelmed, and quietly stunned. Jacob, he called. That's not a race car. Stop making engine noises at the toaster. Jonah, Clara added over her shoulder. Your shirt is on inside out and backwards again. Then, as if tugged by something invisible, Daniel's gaze found the pale blue chair. It wasn't empty. Mila, 5 years old, messy hair, bright eyes, sat perched there, legs swinging, joyfully demolishing a strawberry with both hands. She looked up mid-chew, cheeks puffed like a chipmunk. What? She asked, strawberry juice glistening on her chin. Daniel didn't answer. Couldn't. His heart clenched, then bloomed. The chair wasn't shrine anymore. It was part of the living, sticky-fingered, loud, laughing life. The ache inside him shifted, softened. He turned away, breath caught in his throat, and returned to the stove. When he glanced back, Mila had spilled her milk. Jonah handed her a napkin. She giggled. A normal moment. And for Daniel, it was everything. Later that morning, Clara found him outside on the old swing he'd hung from the oak tree. He was staring at the horizon, something unreadable in his expression. You okay? She asked. He nodded. Yeah, better than okay. She sat beside him, their knees touching. It was Mila, wasn't it? She said. Daniel blinked. You saw. I always see. He exhaled, slow and deep. I thought it would hurt, seeing someone else in that chair. But it didn't, Clara said softly. No, he agreed, because it means the house is breathing again. She looked at him, eyes shining. It's not just the house. What else? He met her gaze, something unspoken trembling at the edge. I'm breathing again, too. That afternoon, Clara handed him a flyer for a community innovation grant, $10,000, and access to regional distribution. The theme, solutions that change lives. You should apply, she said. I don't do contests. You do now, she replied, arms crossed, defiant and hopeful. He laughed. Pushy. She kissed his cheek. Motivated. So that night, when the house was still and the stars hung silent over the roof, Daniel sat beside Clara in the garage and filled out the application. Name, Daniel Crane. Project title, The Growth Brace. Mission statement, helping children walk toward their future with dignity, hope, and a little bit of joy. When he finished, his hands trembled. I'm scared, he said. Of what? That they'll see me now and think I waited too long. Clara took his hand, firm and steady. Daniel, you didn't wait. You healed. Weeks passed. Then the letters began to arrive, not anonymous, but real. From therapists, parents, a hospital in Billings offering to trial his designs. Each envelope was a whisper of validation, a breath of trust. One afternoon, the children transformed the living room into a gallery. Drawings lined the walls. Cardboard inventions filled the floor. "This is our robot for hugging sad people," Jacob narrated. "And this is our flying wagon for babies who cry too much." Daniel stood in the doorway, hands on his hips, heart full. Mila tugged on his sleeve. "Can I tell people you're my dad now?" she asked shyly. Daniel knelt beside her, his voice thick. "You can tell them the truth." She tilted her head. "What's that?" "That we chose each other." That night, he returned to Caleb's room, not to grieve, but to remember, to honor. The books still sat neatly on their shelf. The wallpaper still glittered with tiny stars. He sat on the bed and whispered to the silence. "I miss you, buddy. I think you'd like them. They build weird things. Talk too loud. Leave Legos everywhere. You'd fit right in." His fingers grazed the edge of the desk. "Also, thank you. You're the reason I ever started fixing anything." Then he gathered a box of Caleb's old toys and carried them, down the hallway, through the house, into the garage. He placed them beside his new prototypes. Because memory doesn't disappear. It transforms. It integrates. At dinner the next night, the kitchen table overflowed. 8 chairs now, one repainted hastily from the barn. Clara placed a casserole at the center. The baby squealed. Jacob tried to sneak a bite. Mila spilled her water again. Daniel looked around the table, eyes lingering on each face. People he hadn't known existed a season ago. People who had knocked on his door like a storm and stayed like sunshine. "I just want to say," he began, clearing his throat, "I didn't know what a family really was until you all showed up. And somehow you brought me back to life." A silence. Then Mila blurted, "Can we eat now?" Laughter. Real, unfiltered, full-bellied laughter that shook the walls and spilled through the windows like music. The morning of the innovation fair arrived with a nervous heartbeat. Daniel stood in the living room, adjusting the only blazer he owned. It was older than most of the kids and tight across the shoulders. Clara tried to smooth the lapels while balancing the baby. "You look nervous." "I look like a mechanic playing dress-up." "You look like a man about to change lives." Daniel exhaled. "Most of my life, I've fixed things that didn't breathe." Clara reached for his hand. "Now the things you fix love you back." He stared at her. Something melted behind his eyes. "I'm going to ask you something tonight." "At the fair?" "No. After." She smiled gently. "I already know." The fairgrounds buzzed. Daniel's booth was modest, a handmade table, a pull-up banner designed by the kids, 5 braces, and a looping video of Jacob running in the yard. People stopped. They asked. They listened. "What if every child could grow without outgrowing their support?" The banner asked. At 2 p.m., the judges arrived. They watched Jacob climb stairs. Mila adjusted doll braces. And Daniel told the truth. "I made this because my son once believed I could build anything. Then I lost him, and I stopped building, until a woman showed up with 7 kids and hope." He looked at Clara. "This isn't just a device. It's a second chance. For them. For me." By 4 p.m., the winners were announced. He hadn't won second. Or third. He had won first. Daniel stood frozen. Clara wept. The kids screamed loud enough to rattle the floor. On stage, he held no speech. Only Caleb's rocket ship drawing. "This," he said, "was my first blueprint. Drawn by a little boy with a big dream. He's not here today, but I carry him in every design. And thanks to a woman who brought the world to my doorstep, and children who taught me to laugh again, I'm no longer building in the dark. I'm building in the light." That night, the house was alive. Neighbors arrived. The porch glowed. The garage became a showroom. Daniel stepped outside, into dusk. Clara stood barefoot on the porch, smiling at the sky. "You survived," she whispered. "Barely," he chuckled. "They asked for a speech. I nearly blacked out." "You did fine." He stepped closer, then dropped to one knee. "Daniel." He pulled out a silver ring. "Handmade. Honest. I don't need a cathedral. I don't need perfect. I just need this. You, the kids, the chaos, the laughter, the life. He held the ring out. Will you marry me, Clara? Her eyes shimmered. She didn't speak. She just nodded yes.